the 18th of March, 1945. The snow had just started to melt when the British convoy rolled into the ruined German village. Smoke still rose from the broken chimneys, and the air smelled of gunpowder and despair. Private Thomas Elwood, a young British soldier barely in his 20s, looked out from his truck window, his blue eyes scanning the wreckage. He had seen countless towns like this, ghostly streets filled with silence and the weight of defeat. But something about this place felt different, almost alive. As the trucks stopped, he jumped down, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. A group of German prisoners were being herded out from a barn nearby. They looked tired, beaten, but not broken. Among them was a young woman, Nana Weber, her uniform torn, her hair hidden under a ragged cap, her eyes filled with quiet defiance. Thomas froze. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked human, terrified, yes, but proud. And in that fleeting second, as she glanced back at him, something in Thomas's heart shifted. The war had taught him to see the enemy as a faceless force. But standing there, with the wind biting and the world falling apart, he realized this wasn't just an enemy. This was someone's daughter, someone's sister, maybe someone who never wanted to fight in the first place. When the British sergeant barked orders to move the prisoners, Anna stumbled in the mud. Her hands, bound in rope, scraped against a rock. Thomas stepped forward instinctively, helping her up. The sergeant glared. Elwood, leave her. They're the enemy. Thomas froze again. His hand still supported her elbow. Anna looked up, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak, but didn't dare. Sorry, sir, Thomas muttered, stepping back into line. But the image stayed burned in his mind. Her cracked lips, the streak of dried tears, the whisper of fear mixed with dignity. That night, the British unit camped near the forest edge. The German POWs were held in a fenced-off area, guarded by barbed wire and floodlights. The air was freezing, the kind that bites through every layer of clothing. Thomas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Around midnight, he got up quietly, pretending to check his rifle. He walked near the perimeter fence. Anna sat close to the wire, rubbing her hands together for warmth. She noticed him, her eyes wary, but curious. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of bread, part of his ration. Without a word, he tossed it gently through the wire. Anna blinked, then looked around nervously before picking it up. For a moment, the war disappeared. There was no uniform, no enemy line, just two people trapped in the same endless nightmare, sharing something as simple as kindness. Danke, she whispered softly. Her voice trembled like the cold air. Thomas smiled faintly. You're welcome. The floodlights buzzed above them. The silence stretched, fragile but peaceful. Then, she asked quietly, why help me? He hesitated. Because you looked like you needed someone to remember. You're still human. She didn't respond, just looked at him for a long moment, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. When Thomas walked back to his tent, something deep inside him changed. The world around him was falling apart. But in that brief exchange, he found something he hadn't felt in months. Compassion. The next morning, his sergeant barked orders. Again, the prisoners were to be transferred deeper into the Allied camp. As they loaded them into trucks, Anna caught Thomas's eye one last time. No words. Just a look, part gratitude, part sorrow. The kind of look that says, I will remember you. And for Thomas, it was enough to remind him, even in war, humanity could still survive. The next morning, the convoy rumbled westward, toward the main British encampment. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the gray sky, landing on the helmets of soldiers and the canvas tops of transport trucks. The prisoners sat in the back of one truck, hands bound, eyes blank, while Thomas rode in the one just behind, his rifle clutched loosely in his hands. He couldn't stop glancing forward, where Anna sat among the others. Every bump in the road jolted her thin frame. Every gust of wind made her shiver. Thomas clenched his jaw, trying to focus on his orders. Escort the prisoners safely. Follow command. No exceptions. But the image of her trembling in the cold kept slicing through the wall of discipline that training had built around him. By midday, they reached the edge of a small forest. The unit stopped to rest. Sergeant Cooper barked for the men to secure the prisoners and check the area. Thomas volunteered for guard duty, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked toward the group of PO. Some sat silently. Others muttered in German. Anna sat alone, her knees pulled close to her chest. When she looked up and saw him approaching, she froze. For a second, neither spoke, just stared. The sounds of the forest filling the space between them. "You'll freeze if you keep sitting like that," Thomas said softly. She hesitated. "No choice," she whispered, her English broken but clear. He glanced around. No one was watching. Slowly, he pulled a pair of gloves from his pocket, worn but still warm, and dropped them near her feet. She looked up, eyes wide. "You'll get in trouble," she murmured. Then, "Don't let anyone see," he said quietly. Stepping back, her lips curved, just slightly, into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the memory of one. Before he could say more, Sergeant Cooper's voice roared through the clearing. "Elwood, patrol duty. Now." Thomas snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." He turned to leave, but not before catching one last look at Anna. She had slipped the gloves on, her fingers trembling as she pulled them tight. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the convoy resumed movement. The road was narrow and slick, winding through the forest. Somewhere ahead, an explosion shattered the calm, a mine hidden beneath the mud. The first truck jolted, smoke and fire tearing through its metal frame. Screams echoed. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Thomas leaped from his vehicle. Bullets ripped through branches. The forest erupted in chaos. The German prisoners panicked. Some ducked, others cried out. Thomas ran forward, gun raised, his instincts screaming, fight, survive, protect. Through the smoke, he saw movement. Anna, still bound, trying to crawl to cover. Then, he saw a burning branch fall near her, flames licking the earth. Without thinking, he ran toward her. "Stay down," he yelled. He cut the ropes around her wrists, grabbed her arm, and pulled her away from the wreckage. The fire roared behind them as another explosion sent dirt flying. He covered her with his body as shrapnel whistled past. When the smoke finally cleared, the ambush had ended. The British had fought off the remaining German stragglers. But Thomas's uniform was torn, his face streaked with ash. He helped Anna sit up. She was coughing, her face pale but alive. "You saved me," she said weakly. Thomas shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." She stared at him, a look that said she knew better. That night, the surviving soldiers set up camp once more. The prisoners were moved to a nearby barn, now under stricter watch. Thomas sat by the fire, staring into the flames, replaying everything in his mind. The blast, the screams, the moment he shielded her. Sergeant Cooper approached, his tone sharp. "You risked your life for a prisoner, Elwood. What the hell were you thinking?" Thomas looked up, his voice steady but heavy. "Sir, she was going to die. That's not your concern. She's the enemy. Next time, you follow orders." The words stung, but Thomas didn't reply. He just nodded. Inside, though, he knew something had changed. Not just in him, but in how he saw the war. Later that night, he slipped away to check on the barn. Inside, dim light filtered through cracks in the walls. Anna sat in the corner, wrapped in a tattered blanket. When she saw him, her eyes softened. "You could have died," she whispered. Thomas smiled faintly. "So could you?" For a long moment, they just looked at each other. No war, no uniform. Just two hearts, caught between duty and compassion. Outside, the wind howled across the empty fields. Inside, a small forbidden warmth grew in the ashes of war. The following days passed in a blur of silence, frost, and the dull rhythm of war. The British convoy moved slowly toward the nearest Allied base, cutting through the battered German countryside. Burned villages, twisted metal, and the faint smell of smoke haunted every road they crossed. The war might have been nearing its end, but its scars were still fresh, and its rules still cruel. For Thomas Elwood, every mile felt heavier than the last. He had always believed in duty, in the sharp line between right and wrong. But now, every time he looked at the prisoners, at Anna, that line blurred like fog over the trenches. She wasn't the enemy anymore. She was simply human. During one rest stop, the soldiers made camp near a frozen river. The night air bit through wool coats, and the prisoners were ordered to sleep in the open, under the faint protection of a few blankets. Thomas couldn't sleep. Around him, the others joked, drank, or cleaned their rifles. But his mind was with her, the girl who had almost died in his arms. He finally stood and walked toward the edge of the prisoner area. A guard glanced up. "You're off duty, Elwood. Get some rest." "I'll just check the perimeter," Thomas said, his voice even. The man shrugged and turned away. When he reached the far corner, he saw her again. Anna, sitting by a small candle stub. Someone must have smuggled from the rations. The faint light glowed on her face. She looked up as he approached, eyes reflecting the tiny flame. "You came," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Are you cold?" She smiled faintly. "Always." He glanced around. "Here," he said, slipping a small ration tin through the wire. "Bread and a few pieces of dried meat. You need to eat." Her hand brushed his as she took it. The touch was brief, but it burned through his gloves like fire. "Wash?" asked softly. "Why do you help me?" Those words hit him harder than gunfire. He wanted to promise her safety, peace, a new beginning, but promises were luxuries soldiers didn't get to make. So instead, he did the only thing he could. He took off his scarf and gently wrapped it around her neck. "Then, make this your start," he whispered. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes shimmering. "You'll get in trouble for this," she said again. He smiled faintly. "I already am." The next morning, Sergeant Cooper noticed the missing scarf. "Elwood," he barked, "where's your standard issue gear?" Thomas froze, his heart quickening. "Must have lost it in the last transport, sir." Cooper frowned, but moved on. Years passed before fate intervened. In 1948, on a quiet afternoon at a Red Cross relief station in Hamburg, he was unloading crates when a voice behind him said softly, "You still lose your scarf easily." He froze. Slowly he turned, and there she was, Anna. Her hair was shorter now, her hands steady though. Life had clearly been harsh. Around her neck, faded but whole, hung the same scarf he'd given her. For a moment, the years between them vanished. "I kept it," she whispered. "It reminded me that not every soldier was my enemy." He swallowed hard. "And you reminded me that mercy survives even in war." They stood there, the noise of the depot fading, until only their breathing remained. No promises this time. No uniforms, no orders, just two people who had survived when so many hadn't. Outside, church bells rang, not for victory, but for peace. Thomas reached out, and she took his hand. The world had burned, but somehow humanity had endured.